He spilled blood for the princess. Now the queen calls him hers. The first shot came before the landing ramp fully opened. Corporal Leon Hart hit the deck of the dropship on instinct, not thought. His body knew the sound of a plasma bolt before his brain did. The ramp groaned down into the amber dust of Velharia 4th, and the air outside was already burning with crossfire. Someone on the ground had been waiting. Someone had known exactly when they were coming. Leon rolled left. His shoulder clipped the knee of Private Danny Cole, who was already up and moving, her carbine raised. She fired twice through the gap in the ramp without looking, which was either skill or madness. And Leon had long stopped trying to tell the difference with her. "Contact left! Contact left!" The voice came from Sergeant Rowe at the back of the bay. He was a big man, Rowe, and he filled the doorframe as he pushed forward. "Get off the ship! Move! Move!" Leon moved. He cleared the ramp and took a running step into loose gravel and smoke. The landing zone was a wide clearing surrounded by pale stone formations that rose like broken teeth against the sky. And between those formations, dozens of Veth soldiers were pressing forward. The Veth were tall, gray-skinned, with 4 upper limbs and eyes that caught no reflected light. They moved fast and they moved quietly, and they had been humanity's enemy for 11 years. Leon fired from the hip and dropped into a crouch behind a shipping container left by the advance team. The container had 3 scorch marks already. The advance team had not been careful enough, or the advance team was already gone. He pushed that thought down, not now. The mission briefing had been simple. Extract the Velhari diplomatic delegation from the secondary compound before the Veth offensive reached it. The delegation included a Velhari representative and 2 human liaisons. Secondary objective: protect the Velhari royal passenger currently sheltering inside the compound. No one had said the word princess in the briefing. Command never said that word. It made the mission sound like a story instead of a job, but that was what she was. He had seen her face on the intelligence file. Young, maybe 20 years old in Velhari terms, which meant she had been alive longer than the war itself. She had wide amber eyes and silver-gray skin lighter than any soldier Leon had ever seen up close. Her name in the briefing notes was listed as designation: Lireth, House Vel, second heir. Second heir, not first. That was the whole reason she was here. First heir stayed home, safe behind the fleet. Second heir came out to the edge of the war zone to learn diplomacy in person, to stand beside the representatives, to show the Velhari people that their royal house was not hiding behind glass and ceremony. And now the Veth were here. Leon came around the left side of the container, low and fast. 2 Veth soldiers were moving on the compound gate. He fired 3 times. 1 went down. The other turned, and Leon felt the heat of a returning bolt clip the air 6 inches from his ear. Close. Too close. Danny materialized beside him from nowhere. "Gates sealed," she said, reloading without looking at her hands. "Rowe is dead." Leon felt that land in his chest. He did not stop moving. "How many?" 14 that I can count. More coming from the northern ridge. "We can't hold the perimeter." "No," she agreed, "so we don't hold it. We go in, we get the delegation, we go out. Through 14 Veth soldiers, 17 now." She glanced at the ridge. Moving. Leon looked at the compound gate. Solid duraplast, sealed from the inside. He looked at the container. He looked at the charging Veth line, coming in from the north, and the scattered fire, still coming from the stone formations to the left. "We blow the gate from the outside," he said. "We blow the gate, we signal every Veth in the sector that this is the location. They already know the location." Danny looked at him for 1 second. Then she reached into her kit and pulled out a breach charge. They blew the gate. The explosion threw dust and shrapnel in every direction, and Leon was through the smoke before it cleared, running on instinct again, weapon up. The compound interior was a low cluster of prefab buildings arranged around a central shelter. Emergency lights were running along the ground, casting everything in cold blue. Someone had prepared for the power to go out. Smart. The first Veth soldier who came around the side of the nearest prefab got 3 rounds from Leon before he could raise his weapon. Leon did not slow down. He had learned years ago that slowing down was where people got killed. You slowed down when you were safe. You were never safe until you were off the ground and in the air. "Compound interior, this is Corporal Hart, Coalition Forces," he called out. "We are entering from the south gate. Do not fire on us. Repeat, do not fire on us." Silence from the buildings. Then a voice in careful and slightly accented standard. "Approach slowly, we are watching." Leon approached slowly. The shelter door was reinforced. Someone inside had welded additional brackets to the frame, a human liaison, Leon guessed. The Velhari were a diplomatic species by nature. They did not think in terms of defensive reinforcement the way humans did. This kind of thinking, this is what happens when humans spend enough time with an ally, he thought. You start to borrow each other's instincts. The door opened. Inside, pressed against the far wall, were two human liaisons in civilian gear, an elderly Velhari representative in formal robes, and one young woman who stood apart from the others. She was not pressed against the wall. She stood in the center of the room, with her spine straight and her amber eyes fixed on the door. She held a small emergency beacon in both hands, not because she was scared, Leon realized, but because she had been prepared to use it and had been waiting to see if she needed to. She had been managing the situation from inside the shelter, directing the liaisons, staying calm, the second heir, Lyrith. She looked at him without blinking and said, in flawless standard, "How many do you have outside?" "One," Leon said. She looked at him for a long moment. "One soldier, one very good soldier," Danny said from behind him, stepping through the door with her weapon still raised to cover the entrance. "Situation is fluid. We need to move in the next 4 minutes or the northern unit cuts off the extraction route." Lyrith nodded once. She did not argue. She did not ask if it was safe. She turned to the elderly representative and spoke in rapid Velhari, her voice firm and low, and the old man nodded and stood and reached for the arm of the nearest liaison. Leon watched her move. She was not afraid. She was something else. Something he did not have a word for yet. He filed it away. He had a job to do. "Stay close," he said. "Stay behind me. If I tell you to get down, you get down immediately. No hesitation." She looked at him again with those amber eyes. "Understood, Corporal Hart," she said. He had not told her his name. She had read it off his collar tag. He turned back to the door. Outside, the sound of the Veth advance was getting louder. The smoke from the gate explosion was thinning. Somewhere to the north, Danny's of 17s was probably 20 by now. Leon checked his ammunition. He checked the route in his head. He checked where Danny was standing and confirmed she was ready. He had been in worse situations than this. He was fairly sure. He stepped out into the smoke. The northern extraction route was a narrow path between two stone ridges that opened onto a flat approach to the landing zone. It was the only route that gave cover on both sides. It was also the route where the Veth reinforcement unit was coming from. Leon knew this. He ran for it anyway. The logic was simple and brutal. You could go around the long way, exposed, and be cut down in open ground. Or you could go through the danger and come out the other side before the two forces completed their pincer. The Veth expected humans to avoid concentration of force. 11 years of war had taught the Veth what humans did when they were outnumbered. They retreated, they regrouped, they called for support. Leon did not retreat. He and Danny hit the mouth of the ridge path at a run. Behind him, the delegation moved with surprising speed. Lyrith ran without complaint, without stumbling, her robes caught up in one hand. The elderly representative moved slower, but one of the human liaisons had an arm around him. Good people, Leon thought. They had kept themselves together inside that shelter when most people would have collapsed. The first Veth unit came around the ridge bend 20 meters ahead. Leon fired without breaking stride, 2 down. Third one pivoted, and Leon dropped his shoulder and hit the ground in a roll that brought him up inside the third soldier's reach, which was not a position anyone wanted to be in with a Veth, whose 4 arms meant 2 were always free while 2 fought. Leon had trained for this. He had trained specifically for this, because 11 years ago, in the first year of the war, no human soldier had survived close-range contact with a Veth. Then some humans had survived. And those humans had written down what they had done, and the trainers had read it, and now they trained for it. He came out of the roll with his knee up and his elbow driving into the Veth's midsection. Not enough force to do serious damage, but enough to shift its balance. Then he was behind it, and then the problem resolved itself. He did not look back. "Clear," Danny called. They moved. The ridge path was 60 meters long, and they were 30 meters in when the second Veth unit appeared at the far end, blocking the exit. 5 soldiers, spread wide, already firing. Leon pulled Lyrith behind a jut of stone without thinking, his hand on her shoulder for less than a second, purely mechanical, the same motion he would use for any protected asset. She moved exactly as he guided her. No resistance, no hesitation. The elderly representative went down behind the stone on the other side of the path, pulled by the liaison. Danny was already firing from a low crouch. "Too many," Danny said. "Cover me, Leon." He was already moving. He went wide along the ridge wall, using the uneven stone surface to break line of sight. The Veth at the far end were focused on Danny's position because Danny was making herself loud and visible on purpose. Leon moved quiet. Leon moved like he was part of the stone. He had grown up in the hill country of eastern Oregon, where his grandfather had taken him hunting every fall from the age of 9, and he had learned before he could drive a car how to move through terrain without being part of it, how to become instead a small extension of the landscape itself. The Veth did not see him until he was among them. What happened in the next 40 seconds was the kind of thing that did not look possible from the outside. It looked like chaos. From inside it, Leon moved through it the way water moves through a narrow gap, finding the line of least resistance, always one step ahead of where the pressure was building. When it was done, 4 of the 5 Veth soldiers were down, and the 5th was retreating at speed back up the path. Leon stood in the exit of the ridge, breathing hard. His left arm had a burn along the forearm where a bolt had grazed it. He had not noticed it until now. The skin was raised and angry, and it would hurt later. It did not hurt now because he was still inside the thing, still in the part where the body refuses to report damage. He looked back. Danny was moving. The delegation was moving. Lyrith came around the jut of stone and walked down the path without looking at the fallen Veth soldiers as on either side, and Leon respected that. She looked at him, not at the ground, not at the evidence of what had just happened, at him. "Are you injured?" she asked. He glanced at his arm. No. She looked at the arm. She looked at him. "Your definition of injured and mine appear to differ," she said. Then she moved past him through the exit, and he followed her, and behind them the sound of the Veth advance grew louder, and in front of them the landing zone was there. The dust rising around the waiting dropship, and Danny was already on the comms calling for liftoff prep. They made it. Every single one of them made it. As the ramp sealed and the engine screamed and the ground fell away beneath them, Leon finally let himself sit down. He pressed his back against the wall of the ship and closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. That was all he allowed. 3 seconds of letting the body understand it had survived. Then he opened his eyes. Lyrith was sitting across from him in the bay. The elderly representative was beside her, attended by the liaisons, but her eyes were on Leon. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite read, the way you watch something you are still processing, something you have not yet found the right category for. He had seen a lot of faces in 11 years. He had not seen that one before. He looked away first, not out of discomfort, but because there was still work to do, a debrief to prepare, a burn on his arm to report to medical, a dead sergeant to write a report about for the family he had left behind. He had work to do. He always had work to do. The military station above Velharia 4th was called Reach Station, and it had the gray, compressed feeling of a place that had been built for function, and then slowly adapted to something longer than temporary. There were plants in the corridors. That was always the sign, Leon thought. When the station started growing plants, it meant the people on it had accepted they were not leaving soon. He had been on a lot of stations with plants. The medical bay cleared him in 40 minutes. The burn on his arm was sealed and covered. He had 3 bruised ribs, which the medic found when she pressed on his side, and he did not move, but his jaw tightened in a way that apparently gave him away. The medic was a sharp-eyed woman named Carol, who had been doing this for 15 years, and she told him things that he mostly ignored, and he thanked her and left. Danny was waiting outside the medical bay with 2 cups of something warm that was not quite coffee, but was the closest thing available. "Debrief is in 2 hours," she said, handing him a cup. "Rose family," he said. "Command is handling it. Command's form letter. I'll write the family something real." Danny looked at him for a moment. He had a daughter, 7 years old. "I know." They stood in the corridor with their not coffee and said nothing for a while, and that was fine. Leon and Danny had served together for 4 years. They had learned which silences needed to be filled and which ones needed to be left alone. This one needed to be left alone. Later, walking back toward the barracks section, Leon passed the diplomatic quarters. The wing had been sealed for the delegation's arrival, and there were 2 station security officers posted at the entrance. Standard protocol. Leon was heading past it when one of the officers stepped forward. "Corporal Hart." Leon stopped. "The second here has requested your presence." The officer said it carefully in the tone of someone relaying a message they found unusual. "At your convenience." Those were her exact words. "At your convenience." Leon thought about that for a moment. "Tell her I'll come by this evening," he said. He kept walking. He spent the next 2 hours writing the letter to Sergeant Rowe's daughter. He spent longer on it than anything he had written in years. He was not a man who worked with words easily. He was a man who worked with his hands, with space and distance, and the physics of moving through dangerous ground. But Roe had been a good man and his daughter was 7 years old, and she deserved something that told the truth without destroying her. Leon wrote it 5 times before he was satisfied. Then he went to the diplomatic wing. The security officers let him through without comment. Inside, the wing had been arranged in the Velhari manner, which meant softer lighting, warmer air, surfaces that were curved rather than angular. Velhari biology preferred curves, something about how they processed visual information in peripheral spaces. Leon had read about it once. He had read about most of the Velhari culture in the 11 years since the war had made them allies, the way you read about anyone you were fighting beside. Lyrith was in the main receiving room. She was not in her formal robes now. She wore something simpler, a long tunic in a deep blue that humans would have called midnight, and her silver-gray hair was loose around her shoulders rather than arranged for ceremony. She looked younger without the formality. She also looked, somehow, more serious. She stood when he entered, which surprised him. Velhari protocol for receiving lower-ranked individuals did not require standing. He knew this. She did it anyway. "Corporal Hart," she said. "Thank you for coming. You said it. Convenience," he said. "You said it like you meant it." Something moved in her amber eyes. Not quite amusement. Something adjacent to it. "I did mean it," she said. "Please sit." She sat. There was a low table between them with 2 small cups of Velhari tea, which was a pale green and had no smell that humans could detect but apparently had a complex aroma to Velhari senses. The cup had been placed there before he arrived. She had anticipated he would come this evening. He was starting to understand that she anticipated things. "I wanted to speak to you directly," she said, "because there are things I need to understand, and I have found that the most efficient way to understand something is to go to its source." "What do you need to understand?" "You," she said simply. "What you did today, the decisions you made and why you made them." Leon considered her. "It was a combat extraction. I made tactical decisions based on terrain and available assets. You had 1 supporting soldier, a delegation of non-combatants, 4 enemy units, and a compromised perimeter," she said. "The tactically sound decision was to call for support and hold position. Support was 12 minutes out. We would not have had a position to hold in 12 minutes. So you pushed forward into a closing kill zone. Through it, there's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. "You moved through the 2nd unit alone, 5 soldiers. You were not protecting us from a distance. You were drawing their attention and then removing them personally. It was faster. It was not a calculated choice of effectiveness," she said. "I watched you. You did not calculate. You moved like it was already decided." She paused. "I have studied human military doctrine for 3 years in preparation for this posting. I have read engagement reports. I understand the theory. I have never seen the practice." She looked at him steadily. "You are different from the theory." Leon did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "I am not given to performances of gratitude," she said. "My people believe that acknowledging a debt and then moving on is cleaner than ceremony. But I want you to understand that I understand what happened today, what it cost. Your sergeant is dead. You were injured. Occupational hazard." "Yes," she said. "That is the part I find remarkable." She tilted her head slightly, which was a Velhari gesture of focused attention, the equivalent of leaning forward. "You accept it as a hazard of the work. Not a sacrifice, not a tragedy. A hazard, as if you are a ship and damage is a condition of operation. Isn't that what everyone does? In a war?" "No," she said, "it is not. I have met many soldiers. They carry it differently. Some with anger, some with grief, some with a kind of hollowness." She looked at him for a moment. "You carry it like weight. Like something in your pack, present but not stopping you." Leon was quiet. "I am being too direct," she said. "My advisors tell me I am frequently too direct with humans. They find it uncomfortable." "I don't find it uncomfortable," Leon said. She looked at him again. "No," she said, "I did not think you would." The debrief took 3 hours. Leon gave his account in the flat, sequential manner that command preferred, without editorializing, without analysis, just the facts arranged in order. He gave Danny credit for the breach charge. He gave Roe credit for organizing the initial defense of the landing zone. He did not give himself credit for anything, because that was not how debrief reports worked. And it was not how Leon worked either. After the debrief, Commander Voss kept him back. Voss was a compact woman of 50, with short silver hair, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like she was reading a document you could not see. She had been his commanding officer for 2 years. He respected her the way you respect something sharp and well-made. "The second here submitted a personal account of the extraction," Voss said. Leon's said nothing. Her account is considerably more detailed than yours. She was observant. She observed that you personally engaged 14 Veth soldiers at close range over the course of the operation. Voss set down the tablet she was holding. She used the phrase exceptional even by human standards, which from a Velhari royal is the equivalent of carving it in stone. She paused. She has also submitted a formal request. Leon waited. She's asking that you be assigned to her security detail for the remainder of the diplomatic posting. The room was quiet. The posting is 3 months, Voss said. I know how long the posting is, Leon said. This is a significant political dimension, Hart. The second heir of House Vel formally requesting a specific human soldier for her personal detail. That does not happen. That has never happened. Command is taking it seriously. What does Command want from me? Your agreement, Voss said. It's voluntary. You don't have to accept it. Leon thought about the letter he had written for Rose's daughter. He thought about the burn on his arm, and the 3 bruised ribs, and the weight that Lyrith had described. The weight that was present but not stopping him. He thought about her amber eyes watching him from across the bay as the planet fell away beneath them. I'll do it, he said. Voss nodded once. You'll have rank elevation to Sergeant Pro Tem, resource access appropriate to a senior protection detail, and you'll operate inside the diplomatic wing, which means a different set of rules than you're used to. What kind of rules? Voss looked at him with the reading expression. The kind where what you say in a room matters as much as what you do with your hands. The Velhari are not just watching your tactics, Hart. They're watching how you think. Leon considered that. Good thing I do that too, he said. Voss almost smiled, almost. He went back to the barracks, lay down on his bunk in the dark, stared at the ceiling and thought about 3 months in a diplomatic wing, guarding a princess who watched him like she was still working out what category to put him in. He thought about that for a while. Outside the station's hull, Velharia 4 turned slow and amber in the light of its star, and the war went on in all the directions it always had. And somewhere down on that dusty surface the Veth were regrouping for the next push, and somewhere above it all a second heir sat in curved light drinking tea, with no smell and thinking, Leon was fairly certain, with exactly the same focused precision she applied to everything. He closed his eyes. He had work to do in the morning. He was not entirely sure what that work was going to look like, but he had never needed to see clearly what was in front of him to know he could move through it. He fell asleep. The station hummed around him, growing its plants in the corridors, settling in for the long stay. 3 weeks into the assignment, Leon understood why no one had ever requested a human for Velhari royal security before. It was not the culture gap, though that was real and constant and required attention. It was not the language gap, because Lyrith spoke standard better than most of the station's human personnel, and Leon had been learning Velhari in 20-minute blocks every morning from a language program that Danny had found for him somewhere. It was not even the physical differences, the slightly different light spectrum the Velhari preferred. The ambient temperature kept 4 degrees warmer than human standard. The food that was technically edible for humans, but required a philosophical adjustment. It was the pace of thought. Velhari conducted diplomacy over very long timescales. A single negotiation session might last 6 hours. The silences within it could last 20 minutes. A point raised in the morning might not receive a response until the following day, not because the other party was being slow, but because considering it for a full day before responding was considered basic courtesy. It said, I found your point worth a day's thought. Leon had grown up in a war. In a war, the pace of thought was as fast as breath. Sitting in the back of a 6-hour session and staying present and still and useful, without letting his attention drift, required a kind of discipline he had not known, lacked until he tried to exercise it. He was getting better at it. He was also gradually beginning to understand what was actually being said in the sessions. Not just the words which he could follow, but the layers beneath them. The way a Velhari delegate would phrase a concern as a question so that the other party could answer it rather than defend against it. The way agreement was signaled, not by saying yes, but by repeating the other party's language back to them with minor adjustment. The way Lyrith ran the room. She ran the room. She was the second heir. The formal sessions were chaired by the senior representative, Old Ambassador Velaron, who had the title and the precedence and the ceremonial weight. But Lyrith sat at his left hand and she steered everything. A quiet word before a session started. A note passed during a difficult exchange. A question asked of the other party at exactly the moment the other party had begun to harden, breaking the hardening before it set. She was extraordinary at this. Leon watched her do it every day and understood, in a way he had not understood from a briefing file, why the first heir stayed home. The first heir was the symbol of the monarchy. The second heir was its instrument. She had been trained for this since she was old enough to understand what training meant. It made him think about his own training. The parallels were not obvious, but they were there. You learn to move through dangerous ground. She learned to move through dangerous conversations. The terrain was different. The principle was the same. After sessions, she had taken to walking with him. This had not been planned. On the fourth day, she had simply fallen into beside him, on the way from the session room, back to the diplomatic wing, and he had adjusted his stride to hers without thinking about it. And they had walked in silence for 2 minutes. And then she had asked him what he had observed in the session, and he had told her, and she had listened. She had listened the way she watched, with complete attention. He had said things in those walks that he had not said to anyone, not tactical analysis, not opinion about command decisions, not debriefing summaries, things about how he thought, about what he saw when he looked at a room, about how he had learned to read the weight of a situation the same way she read the weight of a negotiation. She had told him that humans thought about rooms the way Valerie thought about conversations, as spaces with pressure points. Places where force, applied correctly, could open a door or close one. He had thought about that for 2 days. On the 18th day, a threat materialized. Not a Veth action, something more complicated. A faction within one of the minor human colony administrations had been feeding intelligence to a Veth-aligned broker, and the broker had been selling extraction routes. The route from Velharia 4th that had been used for the diplomatic team's resupply runs was now compromised, and there was evidence, thin but real, that the same faction had forwarded Lyreth's current location. Voss briefed him at 0600. "We need to move her to secondary quarters," Voss said. "Different section of the station, less predictable positioning. We're also reviewing the session schedule."
Has she been briefed?
"You'll brief her. She responds better to direct information than to filtered summaries. Her own request on record." He went to the diplomatic wing. Lyreth was already awake, which did not surprise him. She rarely slept more than 5 hours, which he had learned from the night rotation reports. She sat in the curved light of the receiving room, with a document spread across the low table, and she looked up when he entered and read his face before he said a word. "Something has changed," she said. "Yes." He sat down and he told her. All of it without softening it, because she had made clear she wanted that, and because he respected her enough to give it. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The source of the intelligence breach is identified. Working on it. But my location is potentially known. Potentially. Then we move," she said. "Today. And I will review the session schedule myself and propose adjustments." She paused. "Is there a threat to the other members of the delegation?" "They're being assessed. Ambassador Veleron is 73 years old," she said. "He will require additional support if we are relocating on short notice. He does not move quickly, but he will not say so. You will need to address it without making him feel he is being managed." Leon looked at her. "Any suggestions?" She considered for a moment. "Tell him the route requires a slower pace because of the station's structural irregularities in that corridor. He has a lifelong concern for maintaining dignity. Give him a reason that is about the environment, not about him. That's practical. Most useful things are," she said. They moved that afternoon. The relocation went smoothly. Veleron walked the corridor at a measured pace and thanked Leon for alerting him to the structural concerns. Leon maintained a completely neutral expression throughout. In the new quarters, Lyreth stood at the window looking out at the stars and Velharia 4 below. "You are wondering," she said without turning, "whether I am frightened. I wasn't going to ask. You were thinking it. I have learned to read you." She turned. "I am not frightened. I was frightened today at the start before I had information. Fear without information is useless. Fear with information is a tool. It sharpens attention." She paused. "You know this." "Yeah," he said. "I know this." "You are the reason I know it has a name," she said quietly. "I had felt it, but I did not have the category for it. Watching you, I found the category. Fear as a tool. Not something to overcome, something to use." Leon stood with that for a moment. "You've been watching me since the extraction," he said. It was not an accusation, just an observation. "Yes," she said. "Is that uncomfortable?" "No," he said, and it was not. He had spent 3 weeks watching her run rooms and steer conversations, and make 73-year-old ambassadors feel dignified, and read the pressure points of a situation the way he read terrain. He had not thought of it as watching. He had thought of it as attention, the same focused presence he brought to every environment he operated in. She smiled, and it was the first time he had seen her smile. Not the diplomatic expression she wore in sessions, not the composed attention she wore in conversation. A real smile, brief and warm and entirely unexpected. "Good," she said. "Then we are even." 6 weeks into the assignment, the threat was no longer potential. At 0200 station time, an unauthorized vessel breached the docking perimeter on the far side of Reach Station. It was small, fast, and crewed by 4 individuals who had come aboard with falsified maintenance credentials. They moved through the station's service corridors. They knew exactly where they were going. Leon was already awake. He was not always awake at 0200, but on this particular night, some part of him had been running through the security layout of the new quarters in his sleep. The way his brain sometimes ran maintenance on problems he had not consciously solved, and he had come awake in the dark with a specific concern about the ventilation shaft access on the east wall, which had not been on the original security review because the ventilation system for this section station had been retrofitted after the original plans were filed. He had been walking to the east wall to check it when his comm triggered. Breach alert. He moved. The sequence of the next 4 minutes was something he would not be able to describe cleanly afterward because it did not happen in a straight line. It happened in the overlapping simultaneous way that threat response always happened, where you were making decisions faster than you could track them. And the tracking came later, in the debrief, when you laid it out in order, and it looked like a plan, when really it had been instinct stacked on instinct. He reached Lyrith's door before the first intruder reached the diplomatic wing corridor. He went through the door and woke her with a hand on her shoulder, and the specific word they had agreed on in the second week, a word that meant immediate movement, no questions, which she had requested herself, and which was the Velhari word for readiness. She was up in 3 seconds. He moved her to the interior room. He positioned her against the wall furthest from the door and the window. He gave her the secondary sidearm from his ankle holster, a compact piece that she had spent 2 afternoons learning to use, because she had asked him to teach her, and he had seen no reason to refuse. She took it without comment and held it correctly. 3 threats incoming through the service corridor, he said, the comm in his ear feeding him Voss's rapid deployment update. 4th is unaccounted for. The 4th went to the ventilation access, Lyrith said. He looked at her. I reviewed the station schematics after we relocated, she said. The east wall has a retrofitted shaft. I identified it as a potential concern. She had identified it independently. 2 days ago, she had not mentioned it. Why didn't you? I submitted a written review to station security, she said. I assumed it had been addressed. He filed that for later. Much later. Stay here. Leon, he was already moving. She had used his first name, not his rank, and he registered it the same way he registered everything, cleanly and without interpretation, because interpretation was for later. He was outside the door and moving down the corridor. The first intruder came around the corner at the end of the wing, and Leon put him down without ceremony. The second was right behind the first and had a weapon already up, and this was the one that cost Leon something, a burning score across his upper arm, left side again, his bad luck arm, before the second intruder stopped being a problem. The third one had stopped moving, Danny's voice in his ear. Third one is secured. 4th, Leon said. East wall, Danny said. Already inside the shaft. Leon turned and ran back down the corridor, through the diplomatic wing door, through the receiving room, through the interior door, and into the room where he had left Lyrith. The ventilation panel on the east wall was open. The 4th intruder had come through it. He was on the floor. Lyrith stood against the far wall with the sidearm still raised, both hands steady, the muzzle slightly elevated the way he had shown her. Her expression was composed. Her breathing was even. The 4th intruder was not going to be a problem. Leon looked at the scene. He looked at her. Confirmed threat neutralized, he said into his comm. He crossed the room and gently moved the sidearm's muzzle down to the floor, not taking it from her hands, just breaking the aim because the threat was gone. He put his hand over hers briefly. You're clear, he said. She let out a breath, not a shaking breath, a controlled release, the breath of someone who had been holding themselves at a specific tension and was now allowing the tension to ease. I could not reach the comm, she said. I assessed that the incoming threat was faster than the comm's response and I had the means to address it directly. That was the right call. I was not certain it was the right call, she said quietly. I was certain it was the only call. He looked at her for a moment. That's the same thing, he said. She looked up at him. The emergency lights were running again, the same cold blue as on Velhari 4th, and her amber eyes caught it and held it, and she was close enough that he could see the steady beat of her pulse at her throat, which was fast, faster than her voice had been, because she had been doing what he did, running at controlled surface while the underneath moved at its actual speed. "You came back," she said. "That's the job." "No," she said. "You came back before Danny's communication about the east wall. You turned around before you knew." He had. He had turned around because something had told him to. He did not examine it closely in that moment. There was still an active threat assessment running, still a debrief to coordinate, still Veloran and the liaisons to check on, still 3 injured bodies in the diplomatic wing corridor to process. He had work to do. "Let's move," he said. She went with him. After the all clear, after Voss arrived with the full rapid response team, after the station was locked down and the remaining security protocols were running, Leon sat in the corridor outside the diplomatic wing with his back against the wall and his arm being taped up by the same medic, Carol, who had taped the same arm 6 weeks ago. "You know," Carol said. "Some people rotate off active protection assignments after the first serious incident." "Some people," Leon said. She finished the tape. She looked at him. "She's something, isn't she, the heir?" Leon said nothing. Carol picked up her kit. "I'm a medic. I've been taping up soldiers for 15 years. I know the ones who are running toward a job and the ones who are running toward something else." She said it without judgment, just a statement. "Stay careful." She walked away. Leon sat in the corridor for 3 more minutes. He thought about careful. He thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean. He thought about the way Lyrith had held the gun with both hands steady. He thought about her saying his name. He thought about the smile 6 weeks ago and how it had been the first real thing she had shown him, and how every week since then there had been more real things, layered in carefully, like she was deciding each one individually, each one a choice. He stood up. He had a debrief to attend. He walked down the corridor and did not look back at the door, and told himself he was very focused on the debrief and on the work and on the job. He was a fairly good liar about most things. He was not very good at lying to himself. 2 weeks before the end of the assignment, a message arrived from the Velhari home system. Leon was not supposed to know about it. He knew about it because he was senior on Lyrith's security detail and senior protection personnel were flagged on communications that could affect a principal's behavior or decision-making, not to read the messages themselves, but to be notified that a significant communication had been received and to watch for changes in tone or mood that might indicate elevated stress. He noticed the change in routine immediately. She canceled 2 morning walks. She spent longer in the secured communication room than usual. She came to the afternoon session with Veloran carrying something in her posture that had not been there before, not visible to anyone who had not been paying attention for 2 months. A slight forward weight at the top of her spine, the Velhari equivalent of a drawn breath held. On the second day of the change, he waited for her outside the session room. She came out and stopped when she saw him. "You noticed," she said. "Yeah. Walk with me." They walked the long route back, the one that took twice as long, and went past the station's observation bay, a wide arc of transparent hull that looked out on the star field and the curve of Velhari 4. They sometimes walked this route when there was something to think about that needed space. She did not speak until they reached the observation bay. "My mother has sent instructions," she said. He waited. "The diplomatic posting ends in 2 weeks. I return to the home system." She looked at the stars. "My mother is the queen. She has been reviewing the intelligence reports from this posting. Comprehensive reports, including the security incidents, including the extraction, including the extraction, including the breach response, including," she paused, "my own conduct reports, which I am required to submit and which I have submitted honestly." He thought about what honest meant for someone like her, what she would have written about those weeks in her own voice, with her own precision. "She has made a decision," Lyrith said. "The first heir has been moved to a ceremonial posting, a permanent one. High visibility, no operational role." She paused again. "The transition has been in discussion for 2 years. My mother has been waiting for a reason to finalize it." Leon was very still. "What does that mean for you?" he asked, though he already had the shape of the answer. "I will be first here on my return," she said, "which means in the fullness of time, when my mother steps down, I will be queen." The observation bay was quiet around them. Outside, the stars held their positions. "Congratulations," he said, and meant it. She looked at him. "There is a second part to my mother's message. She turned slightly, facing him more directly. She reviewed my conduct reports. She reviewed what I wrote about the individuals involved in this posting. About their qualities. About she searched for the word, their character. Leon waited. My mother found my descriptions of you notable, Lyrith said. Sufficiently notable that she has made an inquiry, formally through the diplomatic channels, about your availability. My availability for a continued role, she said, a senior role, within the royal household security structure. She held his gaze. My mother is requesting your assignment to my permanent detail, not pro tem, permanently, with rank and title equivalent to a senior Velhari household commander. He let that settle. It was large enough that it needed a moment. That would mean leaving the coalition military, he said. Yes. It would mean coming to the Velhari home system. Yes, for an indefinite assignment. For a permanent one, she said with slight emphasis. Those are different things. He looked at her. She looked at him. And he had been good at reading rooms for a long time. And he had been learning to read her specifically for 2 months. And he knew, with the clean certainty he brought to all things, that the Queen's request was one layer of this conversation. And there was another layer underneath it. One that had been waiting since a dropship bay, above a burning planet. Since amber eyes and an unexpected smile, and 2 months of walks and words, and the kind of attention that was something more than attention. She did not say the other layer out loud. She did not need to. I need a few days, he said. Of course. I want to speak to Danny, she nodded. Of course. And I have a letter to write. She looked at him. To whom? To a 7-year-old girl, he said. To explain that her father's partner is leaving the unit. She doesn't need to know now, but if I leave, she'll find out eventually. And I'd rather she hear it from me first. Lyrith was quiet for a moment. You think of everyone, she said softly. You always think of everyone. Not everyone, he said. She understood what he meant. He left her at the observation bay and walked back through the station, past the plants growing in the corridors, past the doors of people who had stopped treating this place as temporary and started treating it as home. And he thought about what home meant for a man like him. He thought about Eastern Oregon and his grandfather in the hill country, and moving through terrain like you were part of it. He thought about Ro and Danny and 11 years of carrying weight that was present but not stopping him. He thought about permanent. It was a large word. He had never been afraid of large things. He sat down, opened his comm, and started writing. 3 days later, he went back to the observation bay. She was there. She had been there every evening, he suspected, not waiting. Just present in the place where large things had been spoken, the way you return to a room where something important happened. He stood beside her, and they both looked at the stars for a moment. Yes, he said. She did not say anything immediately. She was quiet for long enough that he had time to feel the weight of the word he had just said, and to know it was exactly right. Then she said quietly, My mother will be pleased. What about you, he said. She looked at him. The stars were behind her, and the light was warm and the Velhari Afi turned below them, amber and slow, and she smiled again, the real smile, the one that was brief and warm and entirely not for anyone's benefit but his. I, she said, am already pleased. He had spent 11 years in a war. He had moved through things that would have stopped most people. He had carried weight that was present but not stopping him. He had always found the line of least resistance through dangerous ground. He had not expected the line to lead here. He had also not expected here to feel so much like the right direction. He stood beside her in the observation bay, and the station hummed around them, and outside the stars were endless and quiet, and they stood there for a while without saying anything more, because there was nothing more that needed to be said right now, and later there would be time for all the large, complicated things that came next. And right now, there was just the two of them, and the light and the quiet, and the sense of standing at the edge of something entirely new. He had never needed to see clearly to move forward. He was ready to move.